It is my honor and privilege to introduce Malcolm Byrne. He is a peace activist, he is a human rights advocate, and he is a Grammy Award-winning producer and record artist. Thank you so much for coming to speak.
Thank you for that lovely introduction. I'll start my timer so I don't go overboard here. As I was standing here listening to everybody, I was looking up at that tree right there, and I was thinking about a passage in the Bible where it says that God gave dominion over all life on earth to us human beings, and I was thinking of that little bird up in that tree and wondering what it would say if it knew what we were talking about here. Anyway, I want to dedicate this to Julian Assange, Stella Assange and his family, by the way. For as long as Julian is in prison, we have not a leg to stand on as far as freedom goes in the rest of the world. The title of this is called "The Lunatics Have Taken Over the Asylum." It's a song by Terry Hall, Neville Staples, and Linville Golding, the 80s band Fun Boy 3. And the lyrics to the song go, "See a clinic full of cynics who want to twist the people's wrist. They're watching every move we make. We're all included on the list. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. No nuclear cowboy told us, and who am I to disagree? Because when the madman flips the switch, the nuclear will go for me. The lunatics have taken over the asylum. I've seen the faces of starvation, but I just cannot see the point. Because there's so much food here today that no one wants to take away. The lunatics have taken over the asylum." That song could very easily have been written just yesterday. And for me, the song perfectly encapsulates the complete madness that's overtaken almost all of our Western leaders, minds and souls whose collective disconnect from reality, replaced by hubris and greed, seems to open up a Pandora's box of evils. A very early accounting in Homer's Iliad of the contents of Pandora's box reads as such, and I quote, "On the floor of Jove's palace there stand two urns, the one filled with evil gifts, and the other with good ones. He for whom Jove, the Lord of thunder, mixes the gifts he sends, will meet now with good and now with evil fortune. For he to whom Jove sends none but evil gifts will be pointed at by the finger of scorn. The hand of famine will pursue him to the ends of the world, and he will go up and down the face of the earth, respected neither by God nor by man." End of quote. It seems rather convincing to argue that the story of the Iliad may be instructional to us in this present moment as to the final outcome of the so-called special military operation in Ukraine, if one were simply to substitute NATO for the Greeks and the Russians for the Trojans. The Iliad's plot follows several weeks near the end of the Trojan War. Agamemnon insults Achilles, Achilles refuses to fight, and the Greeks begin to die quickly. Patroclus disguises himself as Achilles and leads the Greeks into battle, only to be killed by Hector. Achilles, enraged, kills Hector in revenge. The lunatics have taken over the battlefield. Of course, none of this can come close to describing the utter horror and destruction that Ukraine now endures, ostensibly, at least as far as the general public's mass consumption is concerned, to defend freedom and democracy from those who would do us harm. However, one need only do a perfunctory scanning of the daily videos uploaded to military channels on open spaces and platforms such as Telegram to find images of human beings literally being squashed like bugs, melted to the insides of armored personnel carriers and tanks, and to see desperate human, fragile, mortal frames being annihilated at an alarming rate by the overwhelming firepower of the Russian military, who are outgunning, outmanning, and methodically destroying what was, prior to February 2022, NATO's largest and best trained military force second only to the United States of America. Arms, legs, and bodies are being randomly blown to bits by landmines, drones, rockets, as terrified civilians caught in this tragic whirlwind orgy of destruction, all in the name of corporate profits and delusional neocon ideology, which now even flirts with the bizarre notion of unlimited nuclear war, a war which has become something like a kind of belief-based religion to individuals such as President Biden, Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, Victoria Nuland, Bill Kristol, and the other usual suspects. You've just got to know something is wrong when Henry Kissinger ends up on your Christmas list. And to what aim exactly? To neutralize Russia, the largest and most mineral resource rich and heavily armed nuclear power on Earth, to then open up that country for business and endless corruption and money laundering, much like what Ukraine has now become. A fool's errand is a mild descriptor of this madness. And yes, the lunatics have indeed taken over the asylum. And how else can one rationalize the irrational? Sadly, the general public seems to have given up even trying to understand events. Not through any fault of their own, but I think rather from a mixture of endless propaganda, the likes of which even the great journalist John Pilger told me in a recent interview last year that he's never before seen in his long career as a journalist, having previously covered the wars in Vietnam, Afghanistan, and Iraq, to name but a few. There's a 2002 documentary by British filmmaker Adam Curtis entitled The Century of the Self, in which Curtis correlates the original Freudian hypotheses that humans make the most crucial decisions in life based not on rational thought, but rather on emotional responses and impulses. How else would one explain that buying the latest model Tesla will make one sexually attractive to the other sex? Edward Bernays, Sigmund Freud's American nephew, is heavily featured in the film, is known as the architect of public relations. One of Bernays' first major achievements was helping the Wilson administration sway the general public in supporting America's entry into World War I. Bernays was also highly successful in using PR to convince millions of young women to smoke, all based on the Freudian theory that the most critical decisions we make in life are based on the irrational sexual impulses that drive our innermost desires. By the time the 30s rolled around, the Nazis, ever the great innovators, used these same principles to convince millions of other sane, rational individuals to follow a madman into oblivion, taking tens of millions of lives with them, of which approximately 27 million were Russians. The method that the Nazis used was termed propaganda, and to this day, the word PR and propaganda are interchangeable. As Bernays wrote, and I quote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in democratic society. Those who manipulate this unseen mechanism of society constitute an invisible government, which is the true ruling power of our country," end quote. To anyone who might say that the beginning process of de-escalation between NATO and Russia is simply a form of appeasement, I say take a look at North and South Korea, which have been in a ceasefire for more than 70 years. It may not be the perfect solution, but the alternative is too frightening to even contemplate. Exceptionalism has no place in this new multipolar world that we now inhabit. We must honor the International Declaration of Human Rights, which states in its first article, "Whereas recognition of the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family is the foundation of freedom, justice, and peace in the world." And so I leave you with this one last quote, knowing that lunatics had indeed taken over the asylum. This is from the great humanist of the 16th century, William Shakespeare, taken from The Tempest, Act 4, Scene 2. "Oh, wonder how many godly creatures are there, how beauteous mankind is. O brave new world that has such people in it. Thank you. Keep up the pace. Thank you.